Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is an AFK Journey video, and I want to thank Lilith Gaming for sponsoring it. AFK Journey, it just came out on March 27th, so it's a brand new RPG gacha game. I've been having a blast playing it. I really highly recommend you guys try this out. There are going to be download links in the pinned comment and description of this video, so I do recommend trying it out. If you guys like gacha games, and honestly, you wouldn't be here if you didn't, this is definitely one that you're going to enjoy. It's part of the AFK series, right? So it's definitely good for a more casual gameplay. You don't have to spend 15 hours a day playing like some other games we know. And so it works really nicely in that kind of more casual, easygoing kind of sense. But there is some real intricate gameplay, some good strategy. So I actually have a lot of fun with the arena modes, which is not something I typically do because of that, because of the combinations that you can make with your champions, and because of the ease of access of getting those champions. And I really enjoy that about this game. On top of that, it's got some of the best music and really nice graphics I've seen in a mobile game. So I really, really do enjoy its play. But today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk to you about the beginning team. So like if you're just getting this, remember it just opened on the 27th. It just went out. And by the way, right now is a great time to jump in because they're giving away over 40 heroes in celebration of the release of this game. And you know, if you log in every day, they have that auto login every 7 days. You're going to be able to get every single champion in this game. That is something they plan to do, is make them all available to you. You're going to get some like 200 free summons across that time period too. So it's definitely a good time to jump in and try it out. But what I wanted to do today, because it's new, is I wanted to look at starter teams, basically, right? Getting champions is not hard in this game, but figuring out what combinations to put together can be a little bit. So I wanted to look at the teams, the factions, and kind of come up with some basic beginner block teams for you guys. So when you jump in, you kind of know what you're looking for to start off with. So there's a couple things we have to talk about and discuss just before we get into that, so you understand why we're choosing the teams we are, how we want to go about building our squads. The first thing is there's 6 factions in this game. Now 2 of them are like Celestial and a Hyper Gen or something, basically light and dark. But there's hardly any champions available. They're more supplementary to your main faction. So if you get those champions, you're going to use them. You can just drop them into these teams, but at least now you'll know by the end of this video kind of where you might want to drop them in. So what we want to focus on are the other 4 factions where the champions are a lot easier to get. You're definitely going to get copies of all of them eventually. And it's going to be more about the synergy that you have within. Now, one of the bonuses of the factions is the more champions from a faction you have, a bigger team bonus you get. You have 3 champions, you get a plus 10% attack and HP for all of your champions, regardless if they're in the faction or not. And the more champions in that faction you have, the bigger that bonus gets. You really just want to get the bonus. So one of the things we want to look for is a core of 3 champions from a faction if we're going to build a team around them. You can definitely go with more, and some factions are better suited to that than others, but you really only need 3. And outside of that, you're looking for 2 amazing champions to help build the synergy of that team and really make it work. Now, early on, you're not going to be worried too much about synergy within the mechanics of the game. You still have to unlock the skills and grow the champions and stuff, but there are certain roles that we need our champions to play. And this is the second part, where there's 6 classes in this game, but those don't really matter as much as the roles that the champions play within those classes. So basically what you want on your team is you're gonna need to fill 3 main roles. You need a tank, you need a support champion, and you need a damage dealer. Those are the 3 things you need. Now, there's 5 champions you get available. So typically what we're gonna do is 1 tank, 1 support, 2 damage dealers to make sure we kill the enemy, and then kind of a flex spot. Whether that's another frontliner to help your tank out, or another support champion to help, you know, buff your team or debuff the enemy or just heal your squad, or if it's another damage dealer so you can just hopefully nuke them into oblivion before they even get a chance. There's definitely options as far as what you want to bring in for that last spot. But that's kind of the setup that we're going to use for most of our teams in most every area of the game, which brings me to the third and final point. Is basically there's 3 pillars to this game, 3 areas of gameplay. There's the Dreamlands, which is basically bosses, right? They're kind of like dungeon bosses or whatever. And so it's a single enemy. You have to fight them with your team. takes a slightly different mechanics, right? You're never going to kill them. You're just going to help. You can basically do as much damage as you can on them. Then there's PvP, which is obviously you against somebody else. Those take different mechanics, right? Because there's metas that are going to change and you want to counter what the enemy's bringing for you. So that's going to change which champions you might want to use. And then lastly, there's story mode. And that's actually what we're going to focus on, because that's where we start in this game, is the story mode. And that's basically your 5 champions taking on waves of enemies. And so your 5 against their 5 or 6 or 3 or whatever enemies you're facing. And so that's kind of what we want to do. We want to kind of come up with some basic teams that can face those waves in the story mode. And so that's the criteria that we're using. So with those 4 factions, we're going to look at them individually, go one by one, and try to pick out a good 5-man team utilizing either primarily or only champions from that faction. And that means that you can obviously swap a couple in or out depending on the other champions you happen to have on your account. So as we look at the heroes, I should mention there are obviously S tier heroes and there's A tier heroes. The A tier heroes, you're going to get them pretty easily. The S tier, not as easily, but eventually you are going to get all of these champions in this game. So you can kind of figure out which ones you have, which ones you want to use according to that. And if you're going to focus on a faction, and you don't need to focus on all the factions, right? But if you're going to focus on a faction as your core, you really just need 3 good champion, 3 good heroes out of that, and then have the right fillers for the other spots that you're missing. So let's start it off with the Lightborn faction. It's a really good one. They have a lot of kind of breadth of champions here. Not as great as a focused faction, but good kind of in general. And one of the champions that you're going to want is a champion you're going to get right from the beginning, and that's Vala here. Very good damage dealer. She has this ability to actually shoot from afar or dive in and hit somebody up close, but she deals a lot of damage. So, and you do get her early on as an S tier champion. Definitely somebody you're going to want to build up, and can really fit in a lot of different teams as that damage dealing champion for your team. One of the best supports in this game is also in this faction, and that's Rowan. Now, we did mention support is not just healing, it's also buffing and debuffing. And Rowan, while he does provide some healing, is mainly that buffer for your team. Primarily, he's kind of like an energy battery for your team. He's going to fill up your ultimate skill over and over and over again, allowing you to use your abilities over and over and over again. And it's really powerful. So he's really top tier in the game, period, regardless of what team you have. If you can bring in an extra healer with him, that's probably the best way to go. Depending on what you're facing, he might be able to do it by himself, but his energy boosting, that's really his main focus. So he would fill that support role for that squad. And then if we're looking for a tank, there's one really good option here in the Lightborn. It's not the strongest out of all the champions, so you'll probably replace him eventually, but initially he's very good in this tank role, and then later on can fall into more of that flex role for you, where he's kind of an off tank and support champion. And that's Lucius, because Lucius provides shields for your entire team, which is massive. And in addition to that, does some healing as well. Not a big damage dealer, definitely more sustained champion. So I fill him into that tank initially, but I think later on in the game you can kind of put him into that support role, off tank kind of thing. And so that gets our 3 main, right? We got a tank, we got a damage dealer, we got a support. Now it's about filling the other roles, a secondary damage dealer, a flex spot. I think one of the flex spots you might want to look at would be Corrin. Corrin has some debuff ability with his ultimate, being able to push enemies back. He does deal good damage though, so you could have him in your second damage dealer role. And he does also provide some shields, which makes him a solid support. So he does provide a good support role for your team, but I think honestly I think that's probably where he's going to be one of the better spots. But you can also put him as that secondary damage dealer as well, because he does hit really hard actually. So that's a good champion to utilize, and he's really good all throughout the game. In this faction, he's one of the better champions that's going to be available to you. Outside of that, it gets a little dicey, and so there's some decent champions in this faction that can work for you. Cassidy offers some AoE debuff, like does some big push with her ultimate. Definitely can provide some support and like off target damage dealing abilities. Not a bad option. We also have Atalanta, damage dealer, not my favorite, don't really recommend. We've got Temezia, I love. She can ride around on the battlefield and kind of tear up the enemies as she goes, breaking up their lines, hitting the back line. This is actually one of the champions I kind of enjoy. She's probably better for arena than maybe for story mode, but you know, there are some options for that. I don't really necessarily recommend any of them supremely. One couple that you might want to keep in mind for Marilee is a good damage dealer here, and then also Faye is a decent healer as well. Not a top tier one, but if you need another support champion, she could fill that role for you pretty good. She does do a lot of healing for your team. And then next on the list are the Maulers, and this is kind of that animal-esque barbarian style savannah faction here. So one of the ones I like is Antandra. She's a really good tank for you. She's not one of the best, but she is very tanky, very defensive, does a lot of damage mitigation, hard to kill. So she's kind of optimal for that in this faction. It does have another option though. You could use Brutus as well. He has an ability to kind of prevent him from dying, and he can work as a tank in a pinch for your team also. Plus he deals a lot of damage. So in that sense, he's really, really good. But the one we think we really want is the support champion. That's this guy, Smokey and Murky. Is an amazing support champion, puts a big smoke ring on the battlefield and everybody in it is continually healing and being buffed. It's limited because it's only stuck in one spot, but it's really, really effective, and I think he's top tier for that kind of a role. If you don't have him or you're looking for that flex spot, another option in this faction is Coco. She's not great early on, but as she levels up, she gets better. She provides some healing, not a ton, some buffs, not a ton, but can definitely do some damage on top of that. So I think that's kind of why she's more of a flex spot for you. I think is really where she would fit for your team. The part where this faction shines, I think, is in the damage dealing department. You've got Odie, who's top tier and only an A rank champion, so he's very easy to get. He's going to be exceptionally good for you. Definitely somebody that you're going to want to level up. He's good all over. Another one I really like is Seth, this Panther, kind of a roguish. He can jump around all over the battlefield, hit the back line, throw off the enemy a lot. Somebody I really, really enjoy using, quite frankly. And then another one that I really like a lot is Shakir, who's kind of like Seth, just a little bit stronger. He hits really, really hard. Both him and Seth provide some self-healing too, which really helps, especially with Smokey and Miri. If they go outside that circle, they can kind of take care of themselves. Then we come to the Wilder faction, and honestly, they have maybe the best tank in the game. Arguably, probably the second best, but really good in Granny Donnie. She provides a ton of crowd control options, whether that's immobilizing enemies or, taunting them. She also heals herself, so she's got self-sustain, an incredibly effective tank, debuffing and taunting and healing herself. Really, really good. Absolutely love her. Wish I had her on my account. They also have the best healer in this game, which is Hewin. And Hewin is just all she does is heal. AoE heals all day long, all the time. Incredibly strong champion. Those two are both top tier, regardless of what faction you build around. But they're great substitutes if you're using a 3-man team from another faction. Outside of that, though, it gets a little bit more iffy, right? We're looking for damage dealers in that flex spot, and they have a lot of champions that do a little bit of both. Someone that just does damage really is Byron. He's kind of a main damage dealing champion. He does have a little bit of crowd control stuff, but mainly it's a damage dealer, and he's very strong at it, very good with his hawk there. Definitely somebody I would look at. But there's also, let me move the other way. Nope. Yeah, this is one of them. Iron is a great alternate damage dealer. He's a melee champion, but more importantly, he has an ultimate that sucks everybody into one spot. If you have good AoE damage, Iron is a great one to set up the enemy with. He'll suck them all up into one spot, and then you can AoE damage them, especially when you combine it with Granny Deli or other CC champions that lock them into place. It can be really, really effective to have on your team. So that's definitely somebody else I would be looking strongly at. And then of course a flex spot that I love is Leica, and I think she works really good in that spot because she brings basically reduces the enemy defense, making them more susceptible to damage, which is really effective. And that's kind of a big thing with her skill. Other than that, she's dealing a lot of damage, and so she can be super, super effective for you, kind of in that more support role. Less healing, less buffing, but more debuffing support role. And then there is, if you don't have any of those champions or you need another healer, Damien's pretty solid as a healer. Definitely somebody I would be looking at. But the other champion I wanted to point out, there is a really good AoE damage dealer in this faction. If I can find him, I know he's somewhere here. Of course, I don't have a lot of these champions, right? So it makes it a little bit harder for me to find sometimes. Here we go. Arden here is really good. If the enemy is crowd controlled, he will bring a thunderstorm and just lightning bolt them, and it does like double damage when they're under crowd control. It's really strong in combination with some of these other champions from this faction. So one of the things I like about that Wilder faction is it's very complete. There's a lot of really good options that kind of work well in tandem with each other. And that, of course, takes us to the final faction. And this last faction is the Graveborn faction, the Undead, maybe the strongest out of all the factions because they have more, I think they have more top tier champions than any of the other groupings here. Starting with Thorin, who is the best tank in the game, mostly because he's going to give himself a full revive. He has a one-time revive when he gets killed. It makes him just incredibly tough to kill. And on top of that, the dude can deal some good damage as well. This guy really is the king. The crown is deserved. And then, of course, they have one of the best damage dealers, Incessia. Incessia is somebody you're going to get right from the get-go. This is a champion that you're guaranteed to get eventually. So she is going to be on your team, and she's a really strong damage dealer. Individually, from range, she hits hard, but then also she brings a big summons that like a melee summons monster that will do a lot of damage for you as well. So that's kind of becomes a nice little off tank champion to bring in later on. So she's really, really good. The hard part is their main thing is Thorin and damage, right? That's really where they focus, because in addition to Cessia, you have two other really good damage dealers that you're going to want to look at. Viperion is one of them, who's one of the best AoE damage dealers in this game. He takes a little bit of time to get charged up and going, but once he's going, he is going strong. So definitely somebody you would want to look at to bring in for your team. Oh, not that way. Go the other way. No, Salazar's, whatever. Sylvina is incredibly strong. She will, at the start of a fight, jump to the back line and attack their back line. Can totally mess up the enemy's plans. Makes her really good for things like PvP, but also really good for story mode, depending on the map style that you're at. She can be a little squishy early on, so ranking her up is really important, but if she's strong enough to survive attacks from the enemy, she can be incredibly powerful for you. And then, of course, we haven't talked about any support whatsoever. There's only one real healer in this faction, Nero, and he's just not very good at it. I've tried it, doesn't really work that great. So you're going to want to bring in somebody from another faction for that. But one thing that you do have are some debuffs, especially with Carolina. I think she fits very nicely into the flex spot for your team because she has nothing but freezes and frostbite and snowballs, but a bunch of crowd control elements that really limit the enemy, lock them down, or slow them down. It can be really, really powerful for you. So I really recommend using her in that kind of a flex spot role. I think that's really where she's going to be good. Pairs really nicely if you have a big healer. I think that's where you're really going to see her shine, so that you don't have to worry about that. She can just kind of come in and deal a lot of damage. So now you have at least a foundation of champions to build a team around. You can take any three of those champions we discussed and pair them with two other champions and have a pretty solid team to build around. So that way you can use your best S tier champions and still have a complete team that's going to advantage you as much as possible. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's a really, it's important to kind of figure out, how do I want to build this squad out? Making sure that you're able to absorb damage from the enemy with the tank is really big. Being able to deal damage is, of course, awesome and important. And then sustaining your own team, I think, is really important too. So making sure that you have that combination of skills and teamwork, I think, is really, really important. And that's a big part of how you want to go building your squad out, right? So making sure you have all those roles, that you have that core faction bit, so you get a little bit of stat boost. All that's going to be really important. And with all the different modes in this game, you're going to find that kind of synergy pops up a lot, right? It's not just limited to the story mode. You're going to find that in every different aspect of the game that you try to go under. It's real tempting to build a 5-man squad from one faction. You don't have to, and you probably shouldn't rely on that. Make sure you get a complete team. That's going to be the most important thing. So anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this or got a little bit of knowledge. So when you download the game using the links in the pinned comment description down below, you have an idea of what you're doing. Again, big thank you to AFK Journey for sponsoring this video. They just released it on March 27th, so it is brand new. It's a perfect time to jump in. You can get a lot of free champions, a lot of free heroes, and eventually all these heroes are going to be available. You will get them all. It is that kind of a game where you can really get them all without having to, break open the bank big time to do so. So I really wish you guys a lot of luck in playing it. And until next we meet, on the Deadwood Jedi.